Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining in our second official Cape Cast, Writing a Drama Pilot. We have a great discussion with you tonight with two of our alumni, Teresa Huang and Mitali Jahagirdar. But before I bring them in, just a few housekeeping rules. We ask that, we are going to take Q&A later in this session. So please feel free to ask your questions in the comments, and we can pull them and we'll ask them later on in the session. And we are opening submissions for our 2021 Cape New Writers Fellowship very soon, in 2 days on October 1st. Please visit capeusa.org for more information about that. Okay, but without further ado, please welcome our guests, Mitali and Teresa. Hello, ladies. Thank you so much for coming. It is so lovely to see you. It's been a while since we've been able to gather.
So long.
But it's so great to see you guys. So Teresa, you are currently a story editor on MACGYVER, and Nita, you are a staff writer on Just Beyond. So congratulations on getting staffed and employed during the pandemic. I have a lot of questions about that. Maybe we could get to that later, but let's jump right into it. We're here to talk about writing drama pilots. You guys have obviously done an incredible job in which you have been staffed, and you've both taken part in network writing programs. So I guess, let's start at the kernel. When you're writing pilots, where do you draw your inspiration and those ideas from?
You want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I just read a lot of articles, like from random places, whatever pops up on Twitter sometimes. I'll read a lot, and I'll know something is an idea if I read something and I think, oh, I'd watch this. Or like if I wonder why no one is talking about this. And if I can ask myself that question, then more often than not, there's probably something there. And maybe it will or won't lend itself to a pilot, but at the very least, it's an idea worth exploring and seeing if it's something I can craft a larger narrative around.
How about you, Teresa?
I love that. I don't read that much. I'm kidding. No, for me, I wrote a lot of pilots before I got staffed. I was trying to find my voice, trying to find, my unique POV, because I used to hear execs and people say all the time, we're looking for writers with a strong point of view. And I did a lot of writing before I figured out what I wanted to say. And now all pilots I write they start with something I want to say. And I think my most successful pilots have been explorations of what I want to see in the world, or questions I want to answer, or problems I want to solve. I was told a story about reading this article in the Costco magazine, because yes, I read my Costco magazine. It was an interview with Blake Mycoskie, who founded Tom's Shoes, who pretty much introduced the e-commerce, 1-for-1 model, where for every pair of shoes bought, they donate a pair of shoes to kids in need. And he's been an entrepreneur since he was very young, and started his first business when he was 12 years old. And the interviewer asked him, how do you come up with your business ideas? And he said, I don't come up with business ideas. I look at problems I want to solve and I find solutions for them. Because he's like, if you're just looking for an idea, you're going to do something that's derivative of something someone else is doing. And I was so taken by that perspective, I decided to apply that to my writing. And, my first really successful pilot, successful in that it got me a lot of meetings and people liked it and said it was good, and, got me in some doors and got me into, the Cape New Writers Fellowship, for one. It was an exploration, because I was like, what's a problem in the world I want to solve? And a problem I was seeing was that, like, young people, that technology is making young people less compassionate, feeling like, the conversation on the internet is very, can get very mean and get very, that young people are effortless with attacking each other. And I was like, how do I solve that problem? And so I wrote a 1-hour drama about a small town community where all the adults suddenly and spontaneously die, and all of their enablers are now gone, and now they're left to their own devices, and what happens next. And that was my exploration of a problem I saw in the world. And now that's how I approach everything that I write. I look at a problem in the world and I think, how can I shine a light on this with story? Yeah.
So it seems like both of you are really drawing inspiration from a lot of different sources outside, whether it's an article or just things you're coming across. So I guess, I think some early writers, some of the ideas are very close to home. Whether it's a story that maybe is a version of their own personal story or someone in their family. Is there still that aspect when you're kind of on these bigger themes, and how do you bring that, your personal experience, into those ideas? Or is it something, do you go inside out or outside in when in that approach?
Well,
of finding that connection or that personal kind of truth.
I feel like that relates to a piece of advice that I hear a lot, which is write what you know. And which is, I think, what inspires a lot of writers to draw stories and characters and themes from their own lives. And I'm going to quote another Cape New Writer Fellowship alum, Helen Shang, where she says you should write what you know emotionally. That's how to approach it. So, if you're writing about your family or writing about, your group of friends in high school or whatever it may be, think beyond the details and the specific voices and the relationships and the situations, and just think about what's the emotional story I want to tell about these characters. That's how you'll write something that resonates with on a more global level, I think. And it's how you answer the question of like, well, who's going to be interested in a show about a bunch of, Asian kids in Oakland who play basketball. It's like, well, they're not going to be interested in, what they're going to be interested in is the emotional story. Because if you're telling an emotional story about kids who feel like they're on the outside, who, when they come together, they feel like they're on the inside, that's something that people can resonate with, no matter what background or ethnicity they are.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that. That's exactly
I know, she's so elegant.
You just summed it up perfectly.
This is now your TED Talk, Teresa.
No, I don't want to be dominating. No, sorry.
It's totally I completely agree. It's about the emotional truth of the character, and every character that you write, if you figure out the emotional truth of them and where they're coming from, that's part of your job as a writer, is to figure out what each of these characters' perspectives are within the story, and whether that's informed by somebody by yourself, or just thinking intellectually, like how would this character respond. All of that should communicate some sort of truth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you have your idea, you have the kernel, you have the question, but what is the next step in flushing out into a full pilot that you can actually write and sustain a 60-ish page story about?
Do you want to start?
No, you go.
So yeah, that's a great question. And just before I answer, I want to put out a caveat that everybody has their own process, and there's no one right or wrong way to do this. So what works for me is starting out with, what am I trying to say with this particular story? So essentially trying to figure out, what is the theme? Once I've figured out what it is that I'm going for thematically, that's when I start thinking about what kind of characters would fit into the story. What kind of challenges are they going to confront? Are they the best person to meet these challenges, or are they the worst? Or are they actually the worst person at first, but then they become the best? All of that is you just start rolling around in your mind, what's the best way to tackle the story to best communicate the theme that I'm trying to get across. And then from there, once I've kind of figured out, all right, the general contours of my characters, and I say general contour because I don't actually know what a character may truly feel like until the first draft. And then it'll take a second draft to be like, okay, no, this is what this character is actually about. So I'll figure out what the general, character arcs are, and I'll figure out what the character is going for. And what I'll do is then I'll kind of storyboard, which is actually something that I've only recently started to do because I used to just go from like idea to outline and then like somehow create a pilot. But storyboarding is really helpful because you can lay out the beats of your story and figure out what exactly, like how to get from point A to point B to point C. And
so are you actually drawing like scenes as if you were?
I have a whiteboard where I will put on, like I have index cards on each side where it's like teaser, act 1, act 2, act 3, act 4. And then the next thing that I do is I figure out what are the act breaks. And the act breaks are the major turning points of a story. So basically at this point in your story, your character has figured out, has like made some sort of choice. And now they're dealing with the consequences of that choice. And that's what drives you to the next act, right? Is like, what's going to happen next? So when you figure out your act breaks, when you know what you're writing to, that's when you can go and write those beats and write to those act breaks. And every act break should escalate from the previous act break. So if a character is like, you know, they decide to, you know, go on an adventure, the very next act break is like something's, you know, wrong. Next act break, act 3. It's getting worse. Act 4. Oh no, like everything's got like, you know, gone to pieces. And then you know, the denouement, like resolving the story is when the character has figured their way out of the situation. And now you're heading towards, and they've figured everything out, but then something else happens and that will lead you to the next episode. Yeah. So you basically track your way to those beats. You write to those beats, those big act breaks. And then you should hopefully have every act break heighten. Every act break should heighten, not hopefully, they should.
They should.
And then once all that's said and done, you have a story, basically. So once you've got that whole story, that's when you can take that whole, you know, the whole board and translate it to an outline. And that outline is basically what is, you know, more fleshing out of that board. What's going to happen in the scene? What are some bits of dialogue that might, you know, what are these characters trying to work through in this particular scene? What is this character's perspective? What is that character's perspective? And as a writer, what do I want to happen in this scene to get us to the next scene? When you figured all that out, that's the bulk of the writing, really, is in the outline. All the story issues that you have, if you can solve it in the outline, do it, because it will only, you want to solve it in the outline. Then once you've got a solid outline, you move to draft, and hopefully pounding out that draft is just a way simpler process because you already know exactly how your story is going to look like from the outline alone.
Yeah, I don't super easy, right? So easy.
I
don't have much to add to that either. You know, I tend to spend a little too much time in my journal before I even get to my board. I also use a board where, you know, I have the acts and then I put them on cards. But I tend to process my ideas through writing in a journal, like handwriting. So I have a journal where I'll process, you know, the idea, figuring out who the characters are. Do I have enough conflict between the characters? Do I have enough whatever? And I'll spend a little too much time at that stage. You know, I teach a writing class online, and I push my students to like move through that stage quickly because I know I spend way too much time in that stage.
It is a seductive trap to get caught in research because it's still an idea in your head, and it can be anything. It could be like a Golden Globe winning, you know, pilot, but like once you start writing, it becomes real, and then it becomes harder.
And it's like I have to kick myself out of that stage because I think I have to figure out all the problems. But the truth is, like, I can figure everything out. As soon as I put it on the board, all new problems show up and things that I figured out don't work anymore. And then when I take it off the board and put it into an outline, I also write really detailed outlines where I'm figuring out every turn of the scene. And when I'm there, I'm also realizing, oh, this stuff doesn't work, you know, and I have to fix these problems. So it's like, it's a constant process of like pushing myself through the stages so I don't get stuck. But then, yeah, like you were saying, I make my outlines really detailed. And if I can get through that stage, like writing the vomit draft of the first draft of the pilot will be like a week. If I did it right, it should only take me a week to like crank out the vomit draft. Because I've already done all of the difficult, you know, planting of all the seeds in the on the board and in the outline.
Yeah, no, thank you guys for sharing. I know, and again, yes, everyone's process is different. So, just take these as individual case studies of how two different writers are doing this. Don't feel bad if this is not your exact process. I do wonder, do you write pilots with restrictions in mind? So, are you writing something with the intention of submitting it somewhere, or earlier in your career submitting it for something like a K fellowship, or now it would be selling it, or getting like eyes on it for potential future bosses? Does that ever come across in your head, or are you really just pouring from a purely creative artistic standpoint?
I don't write for commercial purpose. Like, I've learned my lesson on that, of like, oh, so-and-so says that witch pilots are hot, so I'm going to write a witch pilot. Like, directing what I write because of external reasons, I don't do, because it's just going to end up, unless it came from somewhere within, it's just going to be such a slog to write. What I do is I do think about commercialism, in that I know that, in every pilot, doesn't matter if it's a two-hander or an ensemble, there's only one number one on the call sheet. So I'm aware of, like, I have to figure out who the lead is. And I'm going to try to make that lead the most compelling character in the whole show, because they're going to get the biggest star to be number one on the call sheet. And I have to make sure that whoever I decide is the central emotional journey that's going to take us to the pilot, they have to have the best, most compelling story of the pilot. So there is that, which I guess is based on, an external aspect, but I think, like, that's just, making sure that my story drives and has someone that we're following all the way from beginning to end. Mm-hmm. And how about you, Mita?
Yeah, I have my answer to that question is like a little bit of like yes and no. Mm-hmm. Starting out, I wanted to write a pilot that represented my voice. This was something that I wanted to see, and this was something that I thought represented me and what I wanted to say. And that pilot was a genre supernatural pilot, and that was the pilot that did what it accomplished, and that it got people's attention. So my only goal starting out was to get people's attention. Mm-hmm. And the best way to do that for every pilot, every pilot should adhere to this, I believe, but the first 10 pages of your pilot should grab the reader's attention. If it's not going to if it doesn't grab the reader's attention, people are just going to put it down. So your goal is to get people to keep thumbing through after 10 pages. So that was my goal starting out, was just, I want a pilot that's just going to make people read all the way through and be like, hey, let's meet this, this writer. And so that was my goal starting out. Now that I'm a little further along in my career, my goal is to round out my portfolio of writing samples. Mm-hmm. So my first pilot was a genre supernatural sample that did a great job in like getting me to fellowships, getting me my jobs. The next sample, I thought, okay, great, I've got a genre sample that accomplishes that. That's great for sending me out to genre shows. Now I want to write a more grounded sample. So my next sample was a grounded thriller that was very focused and a slow burn, and still within the same wheelhouse as my previous sample, in that they were both drama samples, but tonally different story. And so that sample now is now another sample I have in my arsenal for when I want to go out to shows that might be looking for that kind of a writer. Now that I have those two samples, my next attempt is going to be a dramedy or a feature or whatever it is that helps. You should always keep writing as a writer. And so you want to keep rounding out. I'm not saying, go out and write a comedy just because you don't have a comedy. Like, if it's not your voice, don't pressure yourself. But as a writer, as a professional writer, you should be expanding your portfolio so that you can go out for as many jobs as you can. So that's just this difference in where I was starting out to where I am now.
Yeah.
Awesome. And I've read both those pilots, and they're both wonderful. We are getting a few questions about, once, I guess, after that first draft, I guess I truly think, I've worked with a lot of writers, and they're inherently very perfectionist, and I don't think a script is ever finished. I think it is like abandoned to the fates and just like you got to let it go, right? Like you got to let it leave the nest. But I do wonder from, you have your first vomit, you've done the work, you've done the, boots on the ground work in creating the outline, storyboarding, drawing those like concepts. You have your vomit draft. So what are your next steps in getting it to a point where you do feel like comfortable with other people reading it and maybe sending it to either managers, reps, or programs? Teresa, why don't we go with you?
I think I like to think of writing as sculpting as opposed to painting. Painters, you have the idea and then they paint. But sculptors, they start with a ball of clay and they'll just keep shaping it. So as soon as you get your first vomit draft out, I'm like, first of all, celebrate. Go take yourself out to a nice dinner, or don't take yourself out right now. Get some DoorDash, Instacart a bottle of wine. Like celebrate, because like that's a huge accomplishment to finish a first draft. There are so many writers in the world that are trying to get to that first draft. So when you get to that first draft, like, and you can type end of pilot, like celebrate. And then just comes the process of what I call making it suck less, which is just time and a process of quieting your inner critic, because you're going to walk away from it and then you're going to come back and some parts are going to be like, oh, wow, that's better than I thought it was going to be. And then other parts you're going to be like, oh, that's terrible. And it's just a process of digging through it, rewriting, getting, fixing up dialogue. And again, if you've done all the legwork and creating compelling characters, a strong story engine, good conflicts, good relationships, the editing process, is just changing thing here, changing a thing there. And then I really rely on a network of writers and writing groups to help me with the rewriting process. Like I might do 1 or 2 passes on my first draft, but then I'll give it to somebody, not my agent and manager yet, but I'll give it to somebody because I'm like, I just need someone else to read this and tell me, how it's reading. Tell me what's missing. What's the big, like, oh, I totally forgot to answer what happened to that character. Or I totally missed this, or an obvious story opportunity that I missed. So I have writers groups, I have individuals. My brother is not a writer, but he gives me some of the best notes ever because he's sort of outside of it. So that's part of the process of being a writer, I think, is finding those people that you trust to be that quality control and give you the feedback that's going to help you shape that process.
Yeah, I'm just surprised you let your brother read your scripts. I can't imagine. I mean, I've let my family read some of my scripts, but they're just like, we don't really understand screenplays, and I'm like, that's fine. Hopefully it'll get made into something and you can watch it then.
No, he's really good. It's like you find the people who do different things. I have one friend who's really good at like helping me dig into character, but my brother, he really is able to be like, this didn't make sense, and I don't understand why'd you do this, and like no one behaves like that. I'm like,
it's good to have like a person who's outside the industry who can give you feedback on the story, because that's ultimately what that their opinion is going to matter actually the most.
Yeah. As a viewer. So
right, exactly.
It's fun.
I do think also sometimes writers are so into it. Like if you literally have spent like hours of crafting this world, but it doesn't end up on the page because you just forgot and you don't realize you forgot something. It's really helpful to have people who have not been like in that process give you an outside view of what you've just created.
Yeah, absolutely. Similar to Teresa, I started out with a writers group, and a writers group is really important, I think, when you're starting out, because one, you have a group of friends who will keep you accountable. Like every week we had to turn in something. And if we had a week where we couldn't, next week we'll see you again. And so the pressure is on you to keep writing and to keep bringing in material that you can workshop. And that eventually, that builds to a point where you have a full pilot. So it's really good to keep yourself on track with friends who are also working on their own projects and have similar goals. Regarding your question about, when is it time to move on? When I usually move on when the feedback that I'm getting, whether it's from my friends, whether it's from, I have like a writers group, I have like then close friends who, like Teresa said, some people are really good at dialogue or plot, or everyone I'll get some feedback from them. At a certain point, the feedback doesn't make the script better, it just makes it different. And so it's a little bit, the more you write, the more you'll start to get a sense for when that line is, when it's like, I don't think that this is actually changing the script for the better, it's just making it different. That's the point when it's time, or when you've gone through all the notes. And it's possible to get overnoted, by the way. It's possible to get too many notes and then just like get stuck with all these opinions that you don't know what to do with.
Oh, for sure. When I give people to read, I'm talking like 3 tops. Or like I'll take to my writers group, but like individuals, like I'm giving to maybe 3 people tops, usually 1 or 2.
Yeah, and that's all you need. You only need like a couple people, who can give you some good feedback. And then once you're at that point where it's like, I'm going through all these notes, I have no more notes to go through that they've given me. I feel like I've addressed them all, or I feel like I've addressed the notes that are most useful for the script. Step away from it for maybe a day or 2, depending on your deadlines, and then send it off. It's time. That's when it's time to figure out where it stacks up.
I feel like when I was starting at, the deadlines was really, they helped me a lot, because I had no choice but to send it in on that day. Because if I wanted to complete that application, I had to send it in that day. And that was that. And that was a good thing, because then I could just be like, okay, I'll move on, because it's already, it's in. There's nothing else I can do. Let's move on.
Time to work on the next thing. Exactly.
Yeah, time to work on the next thing.
Yeah,
definitely.
Sure.
I do think
it's awful, and also the thing every writer needs.
Yes.
As someone who is the hammer of the deadline, first of all, very much appreciate the hard work writers put in. But I do think in some cases, perfect is the enemy of the good. So you can work forever. You can always try to make it better, the screenplay, by a certain point, or your pilot. By a certain point, it's like, if you have a great script but no one is there to read it, does it exist? And I mean, in copyright law, yes, but for efficientness and impact in your career, probably not. I have one more question before I turn it over to Q&A. We have a lot of great questions coming in, so thank you. But I do want to know what makes a good pilot great. So I speak for someone who has read a lot of pilots. I'm sure you guys in your career have written a lot of things, and some and obviously one of them eventually hit and kind of set your career off on the momentum. So I guess, do you know what makes a good pilot or a decent pilot great? Like, what is that extra percent or that extra seasoning that makes, can kind of rise this pilot to the top of people's radars?
I say it's a strong, driving, emotional story. Like, I also read a lot of pilots, because I'm a reader for some programs, and I read a lot of my students' work. And I feel like one of the things that stands out in what I would consider a novice script is a main character who's not active, a main character who just is like, stuff is happening around them, people are being funny around them, or people are being dramatic around them, but they're not making things happen. Things are happening to them. And the best pilots I read is when there's a character who wants something so badly, like they don't know what they're going to do without it. And you just go on this ride of watching them go after that thing. And they're not going to get it by the end, because it's television. They're never going to get it. The people on the island on Lost, and they're not going to get off the island for a while.
Not going to get off the
they don't get off the island at the end of the pilot. But you feel like, oh my gosh, that, like, going on this ride with them was so interesting and compelling and fun or hilarious that, I'm definitely coming back for next week.
Yeah, I agree with all that. For me, I would say that every drama pilot is about building anticipation and suspense. And so I want to see a character get into trouble, get into some kind of hole, and genuinely wonder, how are they getting out of this? What is going to happen next? I have no idea. And somehow that character manages to dig themselves out of that situation. Mm-hmm. That's what keeps me watching. That's what keeps me going, because ultimately it's, as a writer, it's your job to write yourself out of those holes. And it's the most cathartic feeling when you see a character who's absolutely stuck in some sort of awful situation somehow figure their way out of it. That's what gives you that really satisfactory, oh, they did it. Like, whoa, like what's going to happen next? Like, all of that is what makes me keep turning those pages in a pilot.
I love that. That's really smart. Yeah.
Again, I know I've read a great pilot when after I turn that last page, I'm just like, I need to know what happens in this next episode. Like, I need to know, like, is this character, and part of it is like what you spoke to, Teresa, like, is this character okay? Like, I love this person, and like, are they okay? I need to know. And part of it is like, what do they get themselves into? So, you know, really I think combination of both of what you guys so eloquently highlighted.
Oh, I once had I was an intern at a management company. I read a lot of scripts, and you know, this was early in my career. And I remember saying to one of the other assistants, like, how do you know if you've read a good script? Because I was just reading a lot of scripts that I was like, I guess this is funny. I don't really know. And she's like, this is how you know. If you get annoyed when people interrupt you while you're reading it, that's a good script. And I think about that because like there are plenty of scripts I start and I'm like, let me check my phone. Let me do whatever. But the scripts that I think are really good, I can't put them down. I just read them from start to finish. And it is what Mita said. It's that captivating drive. It's that like, oh my God, what's happening? Oh my gosh, what are they gonna do next? It's you know, it's watching them get into trouble. I love that. I'm gonna use that phrase next time. Like, it's watching them get into trouble and how they get out of it. It's great.
It's entertainment. Just watching people get into trouble.
I mean, we call them drama pilots, right? It's not like nobody has conflict and everyone's mature adult.
It's the same thing that it holds for comedy pilots too. It's like you watch people get in trouble, and you know, and it's hijinks ensue, and it's a hilarious thing. But ultimately, they're getting into trouble.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, we are going to have a pilot comedy writing session this time next week as well. So please RSVP for that as well.
Yes.
All right. Let's take some questions from our guests. So we have a question from Era Ming. What is the most challenging thing for both of you as a writer, and how have you worked through that?
The inner critic. The inner critic. Which is like 10 times worse for us as Asian Americans, because it's like, it has the voice of our parents. It has the voice of our family members. It has a voice of society. It has a voice of like, it's so loud. That's like, you should have gone to med school. You know, your classmates are all more successful than you are. You know, you read in the alumni magazine, it's like, oh, this classmate just had a major breakthrough in curing cancer. And I'm like, I did research on how to melt a body with acid today. Yeah. You know, like, that's what I do for my work. And you know, and I sold things on eBay to make rent. Yeah, so that's the worst for me is like, you know, this constant inner critic of like, this isn't what a good Asian daughter does. This is not what a good, good college graduate does. Like all that bullshit, and it's all just your fear trying to keep you safe. You know, it's just your brain trying to love you. Ironically, it's your brain trying to be like, oh no, you're right. This is crazy what you're doing. You shouldn't be doing this, and you just have to push through it. You just have to push through it and be like, no, I have a story I want to tell. You know, I have a song in my voice that I want to sing. And you just gotta, and it's day by day. Look, like every day is different. There are some days where, man, that critic is really loud, and I only get like a page out before, and then I look at the page an hour later, and I'm like, it's terrible. What am I doing? Why am I even in this career? And you just got to go to bed and be like, tomorrow's a new day. I'll work on this tomorrow. It'll be fine tomorrow.
Yeah, the imposter syndrome is real, and it's something every writer I know goes through and struggles with. You know, it's even harder, like Teresa said, when you're an Asian American, you know, and woman of color, person of color. It's just, you've got all these voices, and you look in the industry and you're like, why did I choose to be here? You know, I would have been the majority if I'd gone to med school, you know, like it's hard when you're not seeing yourself represented to think that you have a voice that deserves to be heard, but you have to tell yourself that you do deserve to be heard. You do have a space. Your stories are worth telling and need to be told. And that imposter syndrome is just, you know, the more you go further along in this career, the like more products you get, I've heard it only gets worse. So make peace with it as soon as you can.
Yeah, that's such an important thing to know, is that it never goes away. Like, I think when I was earlier in my writing career, I thought I just need to get more experience. If I can just get better, it's the perfectionist thing. Like, if I can just learn how to do it, then I won't feel this way anymore. But it's not true. Like, you're always going to feel this way. I went to a panel at the Guild with Shonda Rhimes, and this was right after Scandal was like a hit, you know. So she had Grey's Anatomy, and Private Practice was going, and Scandal was a hit. And the moderator asked her that first question. It's like, okay, so you've gone from being a writer to then a showrunner to now being someone who shepherds other writers, you know. So, talk about, you know, how your perspective shifted into being a person who's now, you know, being who has an empire. Basically, I was asking her to talk about, like, what does it feel like to be the head of an empire? And she paused and she said, last week was the first time I felt maybe 5 minutes of I'm not going to get fired. And the moderator just like, he didn't even understand. He was like, wait, I'm sorry. What do you mean? And she was like, I felt my whole career like I'm going to get fired. This is all, I'm an imposter. This is all going to go away. I'm going to be found out as a fraud. This was Shonda Rhimes at the height of Scandal. So when I heard that, it really kind of like broke something in my brain where I was like, oh, if she feels that way and she is a bona fide superstar, it's normal that I feel this way. And let's just ignore it. Let's not give it as much power as I've been giving it, and just keep going.
Also, I think, you know, find community, find other writers, and just, you know, your writers group is not just writing support, it's also like this kind of emotional support. You know, I think our fellowship, you know, we talk a lot about this in our fellowship and these things, you know, and how those circumstances or those feelings that never quite go away, and how do you deal with it? And I think sometimes just talking about it, naming the monster, and, you know, working through that on a particularly bad day is just necessary. But yes, your stories deserve to be told. I validate everyone. I am proud of you for choosing this career. I'm giving you the validation that your Asian parents want. Please keep writing.
To them right after.
We need you guys.
Yes, we need your voices. Absolutely. Keep writing, keep writing.
We have a question from K-Pop Highway Radio. So what are the common or uncommon mistakes beginning writers make? If you want to share some mistakes you think you made early in your career, feel free to as well, but I won't force you.
That's a good, yeah. I think what Teresa mentioned earlier about having a passive character, I see that a lot, where you think you're writing a story because things keep happening, but just because things keep happening doesn't mean that they're interesting. So you need to have your character make choices for good or for bad. Those a character is informed by the choices that they make, much like we are informed by the choices that we make. So you learn, as an audience, you learn about a character based on how they react to certain situations under the pressure that they're feeling, and what choices do they make under that pressure. That's what creates a character that I want to keep watching and keep and see where exactly they go and how they, you know, again, how they get out of trouble.
Yeah, great answer.
I think there's two things that spring to mind for me. One is making sure it's a very simple one, guys. Make sure your script is free of typos and formatting errors before you submit it. And look, it's okay if you weren't a spelling bee champion and you're not, you know, a great speller. Like, there are a million people you can pay as little as like $50 to just proof your script and make it perfect. You know, fix all the formatting errors, fix all the spelling errors. It's like you all put too much work into your pilots to have typos take the reader out, be the thing that takes the reader out. Like, so before you submit it to the CAPE program, to other fellowships, to screenwriting competitions, make sure that it looks the best it can be. Because there is a standard format, there is, a way to format slug lines, and spelling is important and grammar is important. Just make sure that that's all taken care of. And then the other thing I think is sort of related to what we were talking about with getting notes from your writers group or whatever. I think another mistake is spending too long on a script, like getting too many notes, like you were saying, Mitali, like too many notes, too many changes, and living with it too long. Like, I feel like 9 months would be like the maximum start to finish. Like after 9 months, I'm just making that up in my head. Yeah, but like
you're about to give me a heart attack.
Like
I think I've spent 9 months on a script.
Yeah. Oh, I have too. Absolutely. Yeah. But like if you hit a year, it's like you don't need to be getting notes from other people. Like launch it and move on to your next thing. Because also you'll learn more the more you write. And it's the more scripts that you write. And you'll learn more from writing 3 scripts in 2 years than trying to write 1 perfect script in 2 years. So just like wrap it up and move on to your next thing. Every script is going to get better. You just have to keep cranking out material. That's how you're going to get better.
Yeah. One thing that helped me in that regard, I just want to add when I was starting out, was I kept a list of competition and fellowship deadlines and put those deadlines in my calendar so that I had no choice. Like I knew if I was going to make this fellowship, I had to finish my script by this date. And once I submitted that, then it's on to working on my next thing, because hey, if that script didn't make it for those, for this round, well then I'm working on my next thing I can reapply next year with. Yeah. So you want to have some deadlines on your calendar that you can make sure you hit.
And you can always revisit a script after you've submitted it. Material never dies. So if you're 4 scripts down the line and you think, that first script I worked on, it never really felt like I, reached its full potential with that. You can always go back and try to, rewrite it or rework it or whatever. But I feel like keeping in a forward moving progress is going to serve you better than anything.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, we have a few questions related to this, but Zenith has a great kind of encapsulation of it. Act breaks have traditionally been placeholders for networks for commercials. So with the rise of streaming platforms, which are not beholden to these, commercial breaks, would you say act breaks are still necessary in pilots? And how hard and fast is that rule now?
I always encourage people to still break with act breaks, because what act breaks do is it ensures that you have movement going on, that you don't have like a half a pilot of just setup before something happens. Like when you're forced to look at the end of an act of like something's got to happen, something has to turn, someone has to discover something, there has to be some sort of revelation or escalation, then your pilot is going to have movement. And so I always encourage people still break it with the act breaks. I like 5. I know some networks have 6 acts now, which just, oh my gosh, I can't even, it's just nightmare.
I know. It's like 2 minutes on the show and then a commercial break.
I know. So I feel like 5 is good, but it's like if you force yourself to have 5, 4 act outs of something happening, you're going to have a story that moves. And then when you write it, you just take out you just don't write end of act 1, start of act 2. You just flow all the way through. But I feel like it's valuable to still break it with that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Both of my samples don't have act 1, end act 1, act 2, end act 2. They don't have any of those breaks in the sample itself. But when I break the story, I absolutely have that storyboarding, that breakdown structure, because that, again, you're writing to a moment. You're writing to something that escalates in tension, escalates in anticipation, suspension. So you want to make sure that you have, as Teresa said, you want to make sure you have that movement in your scripts. I just want to add one thing about pilot structure. This is not a hard and fast rule, but typically the way I break down pilots is the teaser in act 1 will be 15 pages. Then every act after that, act 2, act 3, act 4, will be 10 pages. So when you have all of that combined, you have roughly a 55-ish page pilot. And that's, again, it's a rule of thumb, but it's a good rule of thumb for knowing when you're hitting certain markers in your story.
That's
Like
great.
that.
Yeah,
I'm
thanks for
gonna steal
sharing.
that. Okay.
We have a great question from Vivian N. She asks, how can you avoid unintentionally copying a character, theme, or situation of an existing show?
I have thoughts on. Do you want to? You go. I feel like I'm always going first. You go.
Well, that's an interesting question. So I guess this kind of brings up, what is copying and what is executing? Because a lot of people, especially when they're like first starting out in, this path, they're like, oh, I don't want someone to steal my ideas, or I don't want to steal, it's not about your ideas. Ideas are a dime a dozen. Everybody, the minute you tell people you're a writer, I'm sure everyone here has been like, oh, well, I have got a great idea for something with my like cousin or uncle, or like, everyone's got an idea. Ideas are cheap. It's the execution of that idea that matters. So by, copying another show or something, I mean, if you copy it unintentionally, I don't know if that's something to really worry about, because for example, if I were to ask you guys, what is a story about, name a story about two star-crossed lovers.
Oh, that's good.
Like what would you say, Jess? Like what comes
Romeo and Juliet.
Right. Okay. Or West Side Story. Like
or Mulder and Scully.
Exactly.
Mulder and Scully.
Yeah. But every story, it's about the execution of that story. And as a writer, you're gonna come at all your stories with your own unique perspective, whatever it is. This is why we emphasize knowing your story, knowing your voice, because your voice is going to change that story, and whatever theme it is that you're trying to tell, only you can tell it in a certain way. Yeah. And so it's not something I wouldn't really worry about, whether or not you're unless you're like, literally taking a script from like Breaking Bad and calling it like Breaking Even or something, it's not something to worry about. Worry about how you're best going to tell the story that you want to tell.
And I, in fact, I like to sort of borrow character archetypes from other shows when I'm forming my shows, because it's very helpful to me, especially for writing dialogue. Because when I started writing dialogue, was like one of my weakest skills, if I had it at all. And now I will often try to picture particular actors in the roles, but more than particular actors, like characters they've played, so like I have a character in something that I'm working on that I'm very much picturing as Gugu Mbatha Raw from San Junipero, the Black Mirror episode that she was in, because she was just, free spirited and had this joie de vivre and this lightness about her, while still like covering a deep emotional vulnerability. And I sort of just picture her as this FBI agent that's in this pilot. And so one might say that's copying, but I'm not actually copying any dialogue. I'm not actually copying any, aspect of her character. I'm just sort of like letting, that character's voice inform my character's voice. And I find it really helps me find, the voice of the characters. And if you can do that, it's like, it's just an avenue to your story. And that's valid, I feel like. The story I always think of is the story of 50 Shades of Grey. The story.
Yeah.
Not the story of not the plot.
not like, the actual story. It came into being.
That she wrote it as a Twilight fanfic. That she basically took these characters that she knew and loved so much, and basically imagined this whole new universe for those characters. And then she just took out all the vampire references, changed their names, and that was 50 Shades of Grey. So I'm like, if using, Bella and Edward's voice was the way she wrote a whole book, good for her, like, it's how she got to this story. And it's like, you know, if borrowing Mulder and Scully's voice helps you form this pilot about, you know, hobbits in Middle Earth, whatever it is, you know, like if it got you to your first draft, that's valid, because then it's your execution is unique, whether you know it or not.
Yeah. I say whatever you need to do to draw inspiration to get something on the page, do whatever you need to do, right? I mean, don't kill anybody, but other than that, do what you need to do.
Don't do crime.
Don't do crime.
Don't crime to write.
We have a question from Tung James, and there's also other similar questions, so I'll kind of open it up. But what do you guys do what do you guys do in creating Bibles? Do you have any advice? And I think there have been a few questions about the bigger world. I mean, so outside of the pilot, are you actually thinking about what the series would look like, what a Bible would look like, especially if this is something you're trying to pitch, or is it something you really just concentrate on this like singular episode and then just write it out and go from there, and then kind of think about the Bible later?
Yeah, I never make a Bible. If anything, I'll make I'll have the log line. I'll have, you know, maybe some character descriptions, or at least a list, so that I can make sure I know who all the characters I'm serving. But it's just for me. Like I'm always trying to write a complete script. I'm never trying to pitch, because I'm still trying to build my portfolio and have all the samples that can get me staffed or get me development meetings or whatever it is. So I'm always just writing the script. I know there was a discussion on Twitter recently about like, you know, where someone claimed that like agents and execs and like no one wants to read a pilot unless there's a Bible with it. And I was like, I don't think that's a hard, fast rule. Because I feel like a completed script, I feel like scripts are the currency of Hollywood. Like Bibles might be something you put together as an extra step to get it through the gate. But you know, you never go wrong. A script is enough. 99 times out of 100, I think.
Yeah, I'd say only until you're in like serious development with like a studio or network would you really be considering a Bible at that point. When you're starting out, when you're just developing your own material, a Bible is not. What I do for myself is, and especially if it's like a genre or like a supernatural kind of script, I will have a little world document that I create for myself that is just, these are the characters, these are, you know, maybe here's some character backstory that informs why they're acting this way in this pilot. Here's the rules of the world. If it's a magical world, how does the magic work in this way? What does it not work? Why is all of that helps me inform myself when writing the pilot, so I know what information to put in the pilot and what information to hold back. But the rules of the logical rules are still there in terms of how everything works with each other. So that's for myself. That's not for, you know, sending out anywhere. That's just for me to like keep my mind straight in the story that I'm telling. Yeah.
And I think if you're putting time and energy into forming a Bible, like put that time and energy into writing a script.
Or write a different script. Have two samples that you can get to a place where you can write a Bible for one of them.
Yeah. And I want to be let's be very transparent about this. You are probably not going to be seriously considered for development until you have a few credits under your belt at the very least.
Yeah.
I mean, correct. I mean, I do think I've seen more exceptions, but
at least reps, you know, where you have reps that can put your stuff out and then, you know, get you in the room where you can then work on a Bible for someone, you know, for another entity. But starting out.
Yeah. Again, like one good, well-executed script is worth more than 5 awesome Bibles. Scripts are the currency for sure.
Yeah. And so, especially when you're starting out, really just focus on having a great writing sample. Because, you know, development also comes with a lot of baggage in terms of, you know, production realities and like legalese realities. It doesn't seem quite that fun from my end, as opposed to kind of this freedom you have to kind of write whatever you want and making sure it's just a fantastic, you know, story. Right. Oh, this is a fun question. You guys both came from pretty, I guess more professional backgrounds. So how left demanding fields to pursue writing? What was the transition like? What did you have accomplished in film and TV before making the leap, and how much were you able to write? I guess while pursuing your former career. So Mita,
Oh.
you were in the world of like law and
Yeah.
and Teresa,
Oh, you a lawyer?
No, I was a litigation paralegal, but we had major clients. But my first clients were in residential mortgage-backed securities. So we were defending banks from the aftermath of the financial crisis, which was really fun. And it was demanding. Yeah, hit the nail on the head. It was definitely demanding. I guess, so I had known that I wanted to be a writer for a long time. I was a creative writing minor in undergrad. I went to NYU partially, and I majored in economics, but I was a creative writing minor, and I took Tisch arts classes on the DL. Like it was,
nice.
It was just like really why I came to NYU, so I could take those classes without without having to like
your parents knowing,
without my parents having to pay for like film school entirely. And so I knew that I wanted to be in this field. I just had no idea how to get there. And so part of it was going to a school where maybe I could get some more information on how to go about pursuing this path. But, economy imploded 2009, and I needed to get a real job by the time I graduated. So I was still on the fence. And, coming from, again, South Asian American background where you're supposed to pursue a professional career path, it was a lot to give up, especially since I'd already told my parents I wasn't going to do med school. So I needed to, I needed to work as a lawyer and in a legal field and figure out what it was that I wanted to do. And I very quickly figured out it was not that, that I didn't want to do that. And so then it just became a matter of, okay, what are my other options? And so that's when what I actually realized was that I was trying to apply to fellowships at that point and wasn't getting anywhere because my writing, wasn't at that level. But also a lot of the people who were getting those fellowships, I noticed had MFAs. And I was like, what's an MFA? What's a Master of Fine Arts? What is that? So that's when I started looking into film schools. And as not recommending film school for everybody, I'm just saying that this was my path and this is what kind of helped me. I needed to give myself, I treated it as like, if I go to film school, that's going to be a couple years where I am paying myself to write, where I'm paying myself to figure out this industry in a safe environment where I can make mistakes before I actually attempt to go big. And so that's what I did. I went to UCLA. I got my MFA in screenwriting in 2017. And, and the way I got there was I was still working at that law firm, and I would just, you make time when you want something. That's the thing. You make time.
Yes.
And
yes.
I knew I would, every weekend, I was like, I know I'm going to get called in. I know I'm going to get called in for, some weekend work for something that has to go out like that day. And I'm going to spend my entire weekend at the office. So what I did was I set an alarm. Every Saturday morning, I would get up, I would go to the deli across the street, get myself like a bagel and coffee, iced coffee, and just as much time as I could work on my pilot until I got called into the office. And I did that for a year because that's how long it took to, with the time that I could carve out to write a pilot. That pilot I sent in to my film school for all my film school applications, and I got into film schools, and that's when my journey finally started. But it took setting aside that time. It took a deliberate, attempt at being serious about this career, and that's how I just got my foot in LA.
I love that
so
you
glad you did.
Me too.
For what you care about, yeah, because like I when I started out, writing is my third career because I worked in tech and then I became an actor. And when I was, acting, I always had day jobs in tech to support, my acting career. So I was also writing. I would get to the office early and write for 30 minutes before I started. And then I would write for 30 minutes during my lunch hour. And then whatever energy I had left after work, I would write in the evenings. And it was constant. It was a constant reminded myself to only give 90% to my day job, because I had needed to really, I was trying to give like 75%, but the overachieving takes over, and you just, when I'm there, and next thing I know, I'm there until like 7:30 at night doing other people's work. But it was a constant reminder of like, I can't give 100% to this job because I need to save some for my writing. And it took a long time, but my whole thing was just, it just kept writing. I didn't get an MFA. I didn't go to grad school, which my parents are still mad at me about. They want me to get an MBA.
It worked out.
Yeah, maybe you can talk to them. They still don't think it worked out, but I just kept applying, and I just kept applying, kept getting rejected, and just never took no for an answer. And I think I applied to the CBS program 6 or 7 times before I got in. So it's like, I just kept going. I was like, all right, this wasn't my, these scripts didn't do it. This spec, this pilot, that didn't do it. Oh, let's write the next ones. And I just kept, the more I wrote, the more I got better, until finally they were good enough to get in. So that was how I did it. I just was bullheaded and stubborn. Very Taurus of me.
Yeah. I mean, writing, being a professional writer is just about as much about tenacity as it is about skill, talent, and luck. Sometimes it's just attrition, and you gotta still be standing to be even considered in the game. So again, don't be discouraged. Yeah, don't be discouraged if there's setbacks. Make friends with rejection. That's a little bleak, but I like it. But I want to say thank you, Teresa and Mita, for joining us for this Cape chat. You guys were so insightful, and thank you so much for sharing. Quick shout out. I want to give a thanks to our 2020 Cape New Writers Fellowship partners, which made this series possible. So NBC, Comcast, NBC Universal, Pearl Studio, HFPA, Amazon Studios, Walt Disney Television and the Walt Disney Company, LA County Arts and Culture, Warner Brothers, The Blacklist, and Final Draft. We are going to be opening our Cape New Writers Fellowship submissions for 2021 extremely soon. So please visit capeusa.org/CNWF. That's lowercase, case sensitive, for more details about how to apply. And please follow us on social media. There will be announcements. We'll be doing more info sessions about how to get your script in working order to submit for this fellowship. And I look forward to reading all of you guys, all of your scripts very soon. Again, Thank you, Teresa, Mita. I miss you guys. I hope I get to see you soon and loiter in the parking lot with you for like 3 hours after an event. Thank you so much. Everyone else, thank you so much for tuning in. Be well, be safe, and stay sane.
Happy writing.
Take care.
Thanks all.